Police have charged this man with 2 counts of homicide after finding 2 West Palm Beach area men shot and killed. Now, police finding the bodies of the 19-year-olds a day after the killing. One of them, a former high school star, one of them known for his boxing skills.
All he wanted to do was box, make a living for his family, because where he come from, they don't make it out. But he made it out.
He was adamant about not just being a fighter, but even after leaving the gym, how to conduct himself as a gentleman.
Daytona's police.
The courtroom doors opened, and before the hearing even had a chance to feel normal, everyone knew something was wrong. Damon Kemp was not walking in calmly. He was not standing quietly beside a lawyer. He was being brought into court in a wheelchair, restrained, screaming, calling out, and asking for God. Behind those courtroom doors, families sat in tears. One mother was there for her son. Another mother was there for the man accused of taking him away. And as Damon's cries cut through the room, the hearing became more than a legal formality. It became a scene that people would remember almost as much as the crime itself. Because this was not just any case. 2 19-year-old young men, Trey Ingraham and Jordan Paden, had been found inside an apartment in Daytona Beach. They were cousins, they were young, they had families waiting for futures that would never come. And the person now screaming in court was not a stranger from far away.
God! 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 God!
I've appointed the public defender to represent you, so you have a lawyer this morning. And after I've done all that, I determine the conditions of your release if you can be released. You already heard all those instructions on tape earlier this morning. Let me remind you, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in later proceedings. This proceeding's being recorded this morning, so there's not going to be any doubt, Mr. Kemp, about what you said or who you said it to or when you said it. The public defender has been appointed to represent you this morning, in case you haven't already gotten private counsel, and I don't see private counsel with you here today. Now, you are charged with 2 counts of second-degree felony murder. I have reviewed the arrest report. I do believe that there is probable cause for the arrest. And under these circumstances, I am not able to grant you bond or any form of pretrial release. So you're to be held at the Volusia County Jail, and you will be brought before the felony division judge at the next date on her or his calendar. All right? Thank you very much, sir. Ma'am, take her out of the courtroom, please. Thank you very much.
He was someone Trey had helped. Someone Trey had opened his home to. Someone who, when officers encountered him, reportedly said 5 words that changed the direction of a case. I killed my friend. Before we go deeper, tell me where you're watching from. And as this story unfolds, I want you to decide something. Was this a case of betrayal, chaos, mental collapse, or a young man choosing violence against the very people who try to help him? Because by the time the judge denied bond, one thing was already clear. This was not just a double homicide. This was a friendship that ended in the worst possible way. Before the courtroom, before the screaming, before the life sentences, there was Trey Ingraham. Trey was 19 years old, but his life already had motion. He was not just drifting through the world. He had been known through sports, through school, through people who remembered his personality before they ever had mourned his death. He had played football. He had been connected to Santa Luce's High School and later St. John Paul II Academy. He had also spent time at Bethune-Cookman University, and in Daytona Beach, he was building a name for himself in boxing. That part matters, because boxing is not just about throwing punches. Is discipline, routine, training when nobody is watching, showing up tired and still pushing forward. learning how to take pressure and stay standing. People around Trey remembered him as someone with that kind of energy. His brother described him as calm, serene, joyful, someone with a personality that naturally attracted people. And maybe that was part of why people felt safe around him. Trey was the kind of person who helped. When his cousin Jordan Paden needed support, Trey opened his apartment. When Damon Kemp needed somewhere to stay, Trey opened his apartment too. That detail changes the whole story, because this was not only about two people killed in a random place. This was about a home that had been opened in kindness, a place that was supposed to be shelter, a place where someone had been allowed in because he needed help. And that same home would become the center of a double homicide. Jordan Paden was also 19. He was from the West Palm Beach area like Trey, and the two were connected by family. Jordan was not some nameless visitor passing through. He was Trey's cousin, someone close enough to be inside that apartment, close enough to share that space, close enough that their deaths would tear through the same circle of relatives and friends. That is one of the heaviest parts of this case. Two young men did not just die in the same apartment. Two relatives were taken from the same family network. When one family loses a young man, the grief is already unbearable. But when two young men are gone from the same circle, the grief does not spread in one direction. It folds over itself. The same people are mourning both names. The same family gatherings carry two empty spaces. The same memories now carry two endings. Trey and Jordan should have been living the kind of lives 19-year-olds are supposed to live. Schoolwork, sports, plans, friendships, mistakes, second chances, growing pains. Instead, their names became attached to a murder case inside Jade Park Apartments on Jimmy and Drive in Daytona Beach. And for hours, no one came. That is the part that makes this story even more painful. Because neighbors heard gunshots. They heard something that should have made someone reach for a phone. But no one called. And because no one called, the apartment stayed quiet long after the violence had already happened.
With neighbors.
I think they failed by not calling. We were there Thursday on some other issues out there, but the police were there working something. Why didn't they call us? We find out last night, as we do our investigation, 12, 14 hours into this thing, to find out we have a double homicide.
It was December 2018 in Daytona Beach. Inside the Jade Park Apartments, Trey and Jordan were living through what should have been an ordinary night. An apartment does not feel like a crime scene when you are inside it. It feels familiar. It feels private. It feels like the place where you can relax, eat, sleep, talk, argue, laugh, and shut the world out. But that night, something changed inside that space. The details that would later surface point to a confrontation connected to the apartment and the people who had been allowed inside it. Damon Kemp knew Trey. He had stayed there. Trey had helped him when he had nowhere to go. That is what makes the betrayal so sharp. The danger did not come from a locked door being forced open by a stranger. It came from someone close enough to have already been brought inside. At some point, the peace inside the apartment broke. Gunshots rang out. People nearby heard them. That detail is impossible to ignore because a gunshot is not a small sound. It is not a cabinet falling. It is not a door slamming. It is a sound that tells the body something is wrong before the mind even catches up. But no one called 911. No officer came rushing in that moment. No emergency response entered the apartment that night. No help reached Trey or Jordan in time. And for many hours, those two young men remained undiscovered. That delay became one of the most haunting facts in the case. Because families later had to live with the thought that their loved ones had been inside that apartment for so long before anyone knew. They had to imagine the silence after the noise, the unanswered phones, the missed chance for someone to act sooner. That is why this case is not only about the person who pulled the trigger. It is also about the silence around the apartment after the shots were heard. A silence that lasted far too long. The case did not begin with a clean discovery. It began sideways. Officers were already dealing with another incident at the same apartment complex. Damon Kemp had been arrested in connection with a separate armed break-in and assault nearby. That is when the pieces started pointing back toward Trey's apartment. This is where the case took a turn that almost feels unreal. Damon was already in custody for something else when his words began pulling detectives toward the double homicide. He said, "I killed my friend." Just 5 words. Not a long confession. Not a full explanation. Not a courtroom statement. Just 5 words that immediately changed the atmosphere around him. I killed my friend. Those words did 2 things at once. They suggested that the person harmed was not stranger. And they suggested that Damon knew exactly why officers needed to look closer. Soon, attention shifted to Trey's apartment. There was a bullet hole. There was enough reason to go inside. And when authorities entered, they found what families had not yet been told. Trey Ingraham and Jordan Paden were gone. Two 19-year-old cousins. Two young men. Two lives ended inside a place that should have been safe. And now, the man who had once stayed in that space was becoming the center of the case. There are statements in criminal cases that become impossible to forget. "I killed my friend" is one of them. Is disturbing because of how plain it sounds. There is no poetry in no complicated explanation no dramatic courtroom speech. Just a sentence that carries betrayal inside every word. Friend. That word matters. Because if Damon had said, "I killed someone," the sentence would still be serious. But "my friend" makes it personal. It tells you there had been some kind of relationship, some kind of access, some kind of trust. Even if that trust had broken down, even if the relationship was complicated, the word still pulls the case into a different emotional space. This was not a stranger in the street. This was a young man linked to the people inside that apartment. And that is why Trey's story is so painful. He was known as someone who helped people. He helped Jordan, his cousin, by giving him a place to stay. He had also opened his home to Damon when Damon had nowhere to go. Kindness brought people into that apartment, and then violence destroyed it. That is the kind of contradiction viewers do not forget. He let him in. Then he never made it out. Before we go further, I want you to answer this in the comments. If you hear something that sounds like gunfire near your apartment or neighborhood, do you call immediately or do you wait because you are not sure? Be honest. Because in this case, that delay became one of the most painful parts of the story. When Trey's family learned what happened, the grief came with disbelief. His mother, Narissa Cardion, had to face something no parent should face, the sudden loss of a child who had only just stepped into adulthood. And what made it even more complicated was that the person accused was also young. 19. That was one of the things Narissa said in the aftermath that felt painfully honest. She looked at the accused and saw not only the person blamed for her son's death, but also another young man whose own mother was sitting close by, crying. That does not erase what happened. It does not soften the loss. But it shows how emotionally twisted this courtroom became. Two mothers in the same room. One mother grieving her son. Another mother watching her son accused of taking two lives. And between them was the kind of pain that no judge could make disappear. Narissa spoke about what death takes from a family. You do not get to hear their voice anymore. You do not get to smell them anymore. That is such a simple thing to say, but it hits hard because grief is not only about big memories. It is about small things. A laugh, a voice, a hug, the way someone walks into a room, the way they smell when they come home from practice. The ordinary pieces of a person that only become priceless after they are gone. Trey's sister carried that same pain into court. When Damon was wheeled out, she could not hold it in. She asked why. Why would he do that to Trey? And that question stayed in the room because no answer could make it make sense. When Damon Kemp came into court, the room was already heavy. The victims' families were there. His own mother was there. The judge was there. The case had already become public. But then Damon entered screaming. Not a small outburst. Not quiet crying. Screaming. He was restrained in a wheelchair as he came into the Volusia County Jail courtroom. His voice carried through the room, calling out and asking for God. The courtroom was supposed to be the place where the chaos of the apartment was organized into legal procedure. Instead, the chaos came through the door with him. Families sat there already carrying grief and had to listen. His mother sat there crying. Trey's mother sat nearby grieving. And the sound of Damon's screams cut through a hearing that should have been controlled. This is why the courtroom scene became so powerful. It was not just that he was accused. It was the contrast. Two young men were dead. A family was crying. A mother was asking why. And the accused was entering court in a way that made the hearing feel unstable from the first second. For viewers, it raises uncomfortable questions. Was he overwhelmed? Was he mentally unstable? Was he afraid? Was he calling for help? Was he facing the weight of what he had done? Or was the courtroom simply seeing the same chaos that already destroyed two lives? That uncertainty is what makes people keep watching. The judge did not release him. Damon was denied bond. That decision mattered because it told the families and the public that the court was treating the case with the seriousness it deserved. The charges were severe. The circumstances were frightening. Two young men were dead. And Damon's behavior in court did nothing to make the situation feel stable. He remained in custody while the case moved forward. But a bond denial is not justice by itself. it is only the beginning. For Trey and Jordan's families, the legal process was going to take time. Time they did not ask for. Time filled with hearings, updates, delays, painful reminders, and the constant burden of knowing the case was not over. That is one of the hardest parts of true crime that viewers often forget. An arrest brings relief, but it does not bring the person back. A bond denial brings safety, but does not bring closure. A courtroom appearance brings attention, but it does not end the grief. The family still had to live with the empty spaces, and Damon's case still had years ahead. As the case moved through court, the story became clearer in its legal shape. Damon Kemp faced 2 counts of second-degree murder for the deaths of Trey Ingraham and Jordan Paden. Later, the case also included burglary of an occupied dwelling with assault or battery. That burglary conviction matters because it shows the court did not view this only as a shooting disconnected from the home. The apartment itself mattered. The entry mattered. The violence inside that residence mattered. And in the background of it all was the relationship between the people involved. Trey had helped Damon. Trey had let him stay. And that made the betrayal feel even more severe. The strongest true crime stories are not always the ones with the most complicated motive. Sometimes the strongest stories are the ones where the emotional contradiction is simple. Someone offered shelter. Someone else answered with violence. That is what gives this case its weight. It is not just 2 men were killed. It is 2 young cousins were inside a home. One of them was known for helping others. The accused had been allowed into that circle. And then the same home became the place where both young men lost their lives. The case did not end quickly. Years passed. That is another part of the story that matters. For viewers, a case can feel fast. You hear the crime, the arrest, the court appearance, the sentence, all inside one video. But for the families, it is not fast. It is years of waiting. Years of hearing the names repeated. Years of watching a case move through court. Years of trying to live while the legal process keeps pulling them back to the worst moment of their lives. During that time, Trey's family had to keep carrying his memory. Jordan's family had to carry his. People who loved them had to grow older, while the 2 young men stayed forever 19. That is one of the cruelest parts of homicide. Everyone else continues aging. The victims do not. Their friends reach birthdays they never reached. Their classmates move forward. Their relatives gather year after year with the same absence. And the case becomes a calendar of pain. The first hearing, the next court date, the trial, the verdict, the sentencing. Each step matters legally. But emotionally, each step reopens the same wound. Eventually, the case reached its answer in court. Damon Kemp was convicted of 2 counts of second-degree murder and burglary of an occupied dwelling with assault or battery. That verdict was the court's way of saying the evidence had reached the legal standard. After years of waiting, the case was no longer only an accusation. It was a conviction. For the families, a conviction can bring one kind of relief. It confirms that the court heard the case and reached a decision. It gives the victims' names a place in the public record. It shows that what happened did not disappear into silence. But it is not the same as peace, because the verdict does not reverse anything. Trey does not walk out of the courtroom. Jordan does not come home. Their families do not suddenly stop grieving. The conviction closes a legal question, but it cannot close the human loss. And still, the sentence was coming. That was the moment everyone waited for. When sentencing came, the punishment was severe. Damon Kemp received 3 life terms in prison. 2 young men had lost their lives. The burglary conviction added another layer to the case. And the court imposed a sentence that made one thing clear. Damon would not be walking back into the world that Trey and Jordan were denied the chance to grow old in. 3 life terms. That is a phrase that sounds final. But even finality is complicated for families. On one hand, they know the person convicted will remain behind bars. On the other hand, nothing about a sentence can balance the scale completely. How do you measure 19 years of life against what should have been decades more? How do you measure a mother's grief? How do you measure the voice she will not hear again? How do you measure the cousin, the teammate, the boxer, the brother, the friend? A life sentence answers the court. It does not answer the heart. This case stays with people because every part of it feels like a violation of trust. The apartment should have been safe. It was not. The people inside should have had time. They did not. Neighbors heard something alarming. No one called. Trey helped people. That kindness was not enough to protect him. Jordan was there with family. That family connection became part of a shared tragedy. And Damon's first appearance in court did not bring calm. It brought screaming. It brought mothers crying on opposite sides of the same room. It brought a sister asking why. It brought a judge making the first decision in a case that would take years to finish. And through all of it, one phrase stayed attached to the story. I killed my friend. That phrase is why this case feels so heavy, because it contains the betrayal inside it. Not enemy, not stranger, friend. So what do we do with a case like this? Do we focus on the screaming courtroom appearance? Do we focus on the silence of the neighbors who did not call? Do we focus on the kindness that put Damon inside Trey's apartment? Do we focus on the years it took for the sentence to arrive? Or do we focus on the two young men who should still be here? The answer is all of it, because true crime is not only about the worst moment, it is about every choice around that moment. The choice to help someone, the choice to stay silent, the choice to pick up a weapon, the choice to run, the choice to speak in court, the choice of a judge to deny bond, the choice of a jury or court to convict, the choice of a system to impose life sentences. And then, after all of those choices, families are left with the one thing they never chose: loss. Trey Ingraham was 19. Jordan Paden was 19. They were cousins, young men, sons, and people with futures still unwritten. Trey had been a football player, a student, a boxer, and someone remembered for helping others. Jordan was family, close enough to share that final space with him. Damon Kemp was also 19 when the case began. And by the end, 3 young lives were gone in different ways. 2 were gone forever. 1 was sent to prison for life. That is the tragedy of this case. Not just the violence, the waste, the futures erased, the mothers crying, the sister asking why, the neighbors who heard the sound and did nothing, the courtroom that erupted before justice had even begun, and the sentence that came years later, final but still unable to repair what had been destroyed. Now I want to hear from you. What part of this case stayed with you the most? Was it the fact that Trey helped Damon when he had nowhere to go? Was it the neighbors hearing gunshots but not calling? Was it Damon saying, "I killed my friend"? Was it the screaming courtroom appearance? Or was it the 3 life sentences at the end? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more true crime stories where the courtroom reveals the emotional weight behind the crime, subscribe to Crime Scene Exposed. Because sometimes the most disturbing part of a case is not just what happened inside the apartment, is what happens when everyone finally faces the truth in court.